Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we're going to talk with Cornelia. We're going to talk a little bit about international studies. Welcome, Cornelia.
Thank you so much for inviting me to your show, Brad. I'm so excited to be here and to talk about my favorite topic, international education and getting a college degree abroad. It's actually a great way to make college more affordable, but many families aren't very aware of that option yet. So I hope we're going to change this today.
Yes, absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about what it is that you do and how you came to be doing it.
So as you said earlier, my name is Cornelia. My last name is Betschart-Fuertes. And I'm the founder of Global College Advisors, an educational consulting practice based in Southern California. I help students with the full college application process and help them and their families explore university options in the United States and internationally. A little bit of a background to me. I grew up in Germany and I have lived in the United States now for many years. In fact, I raised my family here. And because of that, I bring a cross-cultural perspective to my international advising. And I can help families understand how different admission systems and timelines work and how degree structures and costs compare. I actually host a monthly Global College Spotlight series to help students and families understand more about international education opportunities. And I introduce universities and international pathways from around the world in there. So and how did I get there? Well, my path into college advising grew very natural, I would say, out of my personal and professional life. I grew up in Germany, as I mentioned earlier, have lived here in the United States. So I have always been aware that education systems can look very different from one country to another. And when my own children and their friends began navigating college options, including international pathways, I saw firsthand how overwhelming it can be for families to compare admission systems, costs, degree structures, housing, and future career possibilities. That experience made me realize that many families simply didn't know much about the international university options. They may be very familiar with the US college process, but they may not realize that students can actually pursue a full bachelor's degree abroad, and that often in English. So at the same time, I also saw that international options require careful planning and that they are also not the right fit for every student.
Right,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, so coming back to what I did then, so I eventually went back to school and I got my independent educational consulting certificate from the University of California in Irvine, and I founded Global College Advisors to help families approach college planning with a global perspective. So today I work with US and international students applying to universities in the US and abroad. And I help them understand how to build a balanced college list, not only with US universities, but with universities in different countries. And I guide them in comparing systems, meeting requirements, deadlines, and show them how to think carefully about fit and long-term goals.
Okay, well, let's jump into it a little bit then. So international studies, I think, means a lot of different things to different people, right? So there's the, kind of the study abroad concept. And I think especially in the US, because we have such a strong education system, for many years, I think it was, well, we don't really need to go outside the country to get educated. There's plenty of options right here, but a few did. But I think it's becoming much more popular, just like study abroad in general has taken off at a lot of universities. 30, 40, 50% of the students spend a semester or a year abroad. They're still US based, but they get out there. But another way to do it that we want to learn more about is, instead of going to a US university and just doing the study abroad program, what if you actually went to a German school in Germany where all the Germans go as an international student, or pick any country, Canada or wherever. So what types of schools are available as far as, we here in the US, we've got the publics and we've got the privates and we've got various buckets and divisions. What are the buckets and choices for international?
So of course, like you said, we also find the private and the public universities overseas. But overall, there are different ways that you can actually do this going to college abroad thing. So you have several choices. So many US universities have actually branch campuses in other countries. As an example, for example, St. Louis, Madrid has a university in Madrid, and you can pursue a full degree there. So basically you get a US education, but in a different country. And it's easier to, for example, go back to the US and have maybe a semester abroad there. But essentially you can potentially do your full degree in Spain at a US university. That is, and as I mentioned, St. Louis is a university with a branch campus, which is attractive in some ways because, yes, you get the US education and you might pay a little less in tuition sometimes. But what's really interesting is the FAFSA eligibility. So since it is a branch campus, the main campus is in the US, and you often can bring over more than just loans to finance your education. Now you can also find private independent US colleges abroad, like for example, AUP, the American University in Paris. Again, you get an US style education, and the price tag is still more aligned with American universities. You also benefit from FAFSA, but here it's more the FAFSA loans with the private independent US colleges usually. So that is the second option. And then you can actually opt in and say, hey, I want to really culturally immerse myself, and I want to go to university abroad and go to a university of a specific country and go to that university, as you said, where all the Germans or all the Spaniards or, the Dutch go, whatever, in the specific country. And that would mean they enroll in a different education system, right? That is, for example, also the big difference, what you touched on initially when you were saying, okay, there's study abroad, college abroad, or whatever, right? So that's the big difference between study abroad and going to college abroad, really, right? Because you're really enrolling directly in another university system versus just going abroad for a semester and still be part of the US university in a way.
Right.
So,
So there's another
no. I just want to basically, so those are all the options you have to go to university abroad.
Okay. So if you're going, again, the most embedded, I guess, or I don't know how you would say that, but where the most authentic maybe is what people might say. I'm going to the German university in Germany where the Germans go. Then your graduation requirements and all that stuff is whatever a typical German would have to do. And if it's a 3-year program or a 5-year program or whatever it might be, how does that stuff translate back to the U.S.? Does the U.S. corporate world, U.S. job market recognize a philosophy degree or accounting degree that was gained elsewhere?
So first of all, I want to say that many international degrees are very well respected and recognized. You can find many of these international universities even on the rankings, right? Even though I'm not such a fan of rankings, but just, it makes some families maybe feel more comfortable. So if you look at the Times Higher Education world rankings or the QS world rankings, you find some schools there. And speaking of Germany, for example, the TU Munich, the Technical University in Munich, is very highly ranked there, for example. But not only, the universities in Germany, there are lots of other universities all over Europe that you will find there and from other countries. So yeah, that's the first thing. Many international degrees are really well respected, and you can easily bring them over to the US. Perhaps I should say something real quick, like within Europe, for example, each country has their own quality assurance system and accreditation process. But within the European Union, universities are usually subject to a very strong quality control system. So you can be really sure to have a really quality degree in the end. Where you have to pay attention is if you want to study a professional degree, and that pertains mostly or most importantly to if you want to study medicine, right? So with medicine, we often say, okay, well, think about where do you want to study? And that's where you should really study medicine, right? Because that's where you will interact with your patients. So which means you should really know the language, but also the licenses and everything else is specific to that country. So in that sense, it makes sense to really study in that particular country. So having said that, though, also So I would say that specifically for medical degrees, right? But even within the medical realm, so to say, there are some international universities that actually have agreements with US universities and, for example, help them with the preparation to the US MLE. They offer clinical rotations in the USA, and some of them even have agreements for a path to residency. So there is some way, but generally we say that you should, if it's medicine that you want to study, you should really maybe study it in the country where you want to practice in the end. Now, if you look at other degrees, like, for example, engineering, architecture, so those degrees don't necessarily need to have always the accreditation, right? So, for example, there's an ABIT accreditation for engineering and STEM degrees. So, and that allows you, or that helps with government contracts, for example. It's very important that you have that ABIT accreditation, for example. But even here, you find some European universities, for example, that have degrees that have an ABIT accreditation. So it makes it much easier to transfer that degree, for example, right? The same for architecture. I'm, for example, working with one student right now who wants to study architecture. And we found out that there are a few universities that have the NAAB accreditation from the US. So they obviously have agreements also with the US that, the maybe semester abroad at the particular university is easier to do. And in the end, you end up having a degree that is very easily transferable to the US, for example. I hope that explains your question in a way.
Yes, exactly. So sounds like it might be a little bit of buyer beware, though, in that it's up to the students or their parents to understand what the value of a particular degree might be here based on, and I guess you have that in general, right? If you want to be a nurse, you need to pass the nursing boards. Yeah. Sometimes there's easy ways to do it if it's a state by state thing. So it might be.
Yeah, exactly. That is the same thing, right? Even in law, right? If you study law, your law degree might not allow you to practice law everywhere, right? You have to get your state license or so. So that is very true. And that is the same for those degrees overseas, specifically those professional degrees that you really have to research well and find out, okay, is this a university that offers me a degree that I can transfer with, in that subject that I want to do? And that's where we come in, right? The specialists that can help families and make sense of all these universities overseas.
Okay. So a couple other things that you mentioned. One was the language barrier challenges. So I studied abroad when I was young, and it was my senior year of college that I spent a semester in Ealing College, which is I don't even know if it exists anymore, but it's a suburb of London. Mm-hmm. I chose England because I thought I could speak the language. Turns out accents were pretty challenging sometimes, even though they speak English theoretically.
That's true, yeah.
But yes, it changed my life. It was a fantastic thing to do. I recommend it. I'm encouraging my daughter to pursue it. She's going to be going to Italy this coming spring if we're still in the application process. So I think it seems like it's going to happen, but we're working through it. So I'm a big proponent of study abroad in whatever fashion. I had a client that met an English girl online. So he's an American and she's English. And obviously they were able to speak to each other online. And eventually it grew to a relationship in high school age. And now they're studying together in England. We were able to figure out how to get them there and how to pay for it with, again, and we'll get into how to pay for it in a minute here. So there's a lot of this going on. What do you see as the why? What kinds of students want to do it? Is there a lot of people that kind of look into it but also hedge their bets? I'm going to apply to 2 places in Germany and 1 place in London and then 4 US schools and then see how it goes. Is that common, or what's the process generally look?
So that's a very in-depth question here that has different angles. So first of all, I want to say that the students I work with often, or most often actually, apply to both sides. So they apply to the US and apply to another university abroad or several universities in different countries. So that's what the clients do that I work with. And because for me, it is important that students have choices. And as we work on a balanced college list, it's an extra addition, right, to have other choices, not only within the US, but also if that doesn't work out, then I'll still have other choices in another country, right? And they might even be better for me, be it in terms of cost, but also academically and so on, right? Which ties in with the language barrier which you mentioned earlier. So oftentimes when I talk to American families about education abroad or going to college in another country, they say like, oh yeah, I have a cousin in the UK. He had a great experience and so and so and so. So we often they think of the UK first. And
Right.
they don't even know that there are other opportunities out there. And then the next question is obviously, yeah, but I can't go to the Netherlands. I don't speak the language, or I can't go to France, right? And that's the next thing. They are not aware that there is actually the option out there to study a full bachelor's degree fully in English in so many countries now. And that opens obviously a lot of pathways. For that reason, again, you can build a really great balanced college list over several continents in a way, right? If the student is open to that. And now we come to that, what you mentioned. What's the reason for students wanting to go abroad, or maybe also for families, why they want their student to go abroad? So one of the main reasons is for many families, especially if it comes from the family side, is the cost aspect, right? So there's different factors to that, so to say. So first of all, if you get a degree within the European Union, many of the countries offer 3-year degrees. So that means you have 1 year less to pay for, right? And overall, tuition cost is much more affordable if you compare it to US universities so if you look at the UK, for example, the UK is a little bit on the higher end, while still more affordable than the US. But then you have Germany on the very lower end, where tuition cost is zero often, right? So for many universities in Germany, international students don't have to pay tuition. And I want to tie this in here real quick to that cost aspect, because low tuition doesn't mean that there's no cost, obviously, right? So I still have to pay for housing, food, living expenses, health insurance, and so on. So there is still cost that parents have to consider, even travel cost, right? For flying back and forth, for example. But that was one reason, cost, why families would want to explore universities abroad. Then there is, for students, that's often interesting if they really know what they want to study and they hear about that Europe offers direct subject entry, which means you basically start your major from day one, and that even applies to professional degrees, right? So if you want to go into architecture, you have classes that pertain to architecture only. And the benefit is also, let's say someone wants to study history, right? Or history, let's take that as an example. And they wouldn't have to take any math classes anymore, because European universities generally don't have the general ed requirement. So that also helps that they can finish the degrees in 3 years, but they also have a different pathway to university, right? So many students have to specialize in their high school years already, have to take very high level classes in these specific courses that already are geared towards a specific major. So they don't really, they have done their general education basically before in high school already. So, but anyway, for a US student, it's very attractive to say, okay, well, you know what, I really want to dive deep into biology. I want to have only biology classes from day one on. Well, that's the perfect student to go there, right? If obviously other aspects fit in as well, right? If that is an open-minded student, if it's a student that is pretty independent, is self-motivated, has no problem with adapting easily to different environments, obviously, right? So all these things are very important overall.
Right. Does it seem like maybe there's another way to think about this? Is there's the kind of the adventure scale, right? There's the, I don't want to take a lot of risk. I'm just going to do the study abroad program from my local college. I'm going to take that one semester. I'm going to go where everybody else goes because they have a relationship. Everything's going to be in English. There's going to be 100 of us all from the university that all go that same spot. To the wild, adventurous, I'm going to go to Malaysia and I'm going to study at some little school that nobody's ever heard of. And I'll be the first American that's ever been there. And I'm going to be their first international American student. And they're going to teach me in a language that I'm going to have to learn. And it's going to be very challenging. And it's, I'll be that, high adventure challenge. Do you find that attracts or repels, or does that part of the mystique for students where they're thinking that way, where they want the adventure, they want to do something different? I think the parallel with a U.S. student, right, would be, well, I don't want to go to XYZ college because there's going to be 25 other kids from my high school there. I want to go someplace wild, exotic, different. So I'm going to look at, across the country or into Canada, right? And then you just keep going further, right? Instead of Canada, how about Europe? Well, instead of Europe, how about, the Far East or, so forth and so on. You feel like there's that adventure quality as well as the,
well,
other reasons?
No, that is definitely true. Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, obviously, the example that you just said is a little extreme, right? Where the student goes into some little country in Asia and doesn't speak the language. Well, that, you have to be very adventurous for that, I would say, including the families with that. But overall, I would say, yes, students do have to be adventurous because they, from their own accord, they would need to want that, right? They want to immerse themselves in a different culture and know that this is obviously a different life than if they would have stayed back and just go to an American university. So it's very different because it's not only that there are cultural differences but also educational differences in the sense that the higher education system is different in these countries. It's, as we already talked about, it's, for example, direct entry versus, taking general ed classes first here in the United States and have a longer time to decide what you actually want to major on. So there are a lot of aspects to consider. And for that reason, yes, a student needs to be adventurous, but definitely a very important thing is that they have to be very independent and, also have to be very self-motivated over there, because going to university in Europe, for example, is a very independent experience, I would say, right? So initially you are in these big lecture halls and nobody really looks after you if you go and attend the lecture or not, right? It's up to you. You want to study, right? So, well, you get yourself there and you get your education that you want. So it's all there for you to take, but you have to go and do it yourself, right? So there is no office that will knock on your door and say, oh, hey, we didn't see you this week. Well, you are considered an adult and you should behave like someone like that, right? So I think so for that reason, that's really important.
Right. I mean, certainly here in the U.S., I think there's a lot of parents that really like the idea of college because it's kind of a gentle launch compared to just, go out in the workforce or move to a different city all on your own. It's, well, you're going to go to this college. There'll be lots of, new people there that are looking for friends. And, the college has a police force that keeps things safe. And you've got dorms where they pay attention to who can get in and who can get out. And there's all kinds of, there's, a clinic on campus and there's mental health facilities. There's all these different things around as support. So I think that's, something that we take for granted sometimes even. And I guess what I just heard is that maybe not all of that is going to be there. And if that stuff is important to you, gotta dig into it and understand what
exactly
what you
that
will
is
get
exact
at the new place.
Right. And that is exactly what you say. You really have to understand what the differences are, right? And even though I want to touch on that, what you just mentioned, like, for example, the safety aspect. So all of these universities have their own, not police department, but they have security on the campuses. So that is definitely there. And if you look at the safety aspect overall, for example, in Europe, most of the countries, they are pretty high on the peace index. What is it called? The World Peace Index, right? And they have very strict gun laws, for example. So safety-wise, that is actually attractive to parents often, especially Europe, for example, right? Because of having stricter gun laws and knowing that their kids are actually overall much safer maybe than they are at some US campuses. But what I just mentioned earlier about, the big lecture halls and, nobody maybe looking after you that intensely, that pertains also to the public schools. So that is very much so. The public schools, obviously, they don't charge a big tuition fee, no matter in which country in Europe, for example. They are all much more affordable. So, and I think we didn't touch on that earlier. So you also have the option to go to a private university overseas. And that's where you get more of these services. So that might be an option where families feel more comfortable with. when they send their child abroad, because obviously you're paying more and you get also more services. But having said that, overall, though, all these universities, all these international universities are offering international welcome weeks before the semester even starts, and they bring all the international students together. So by the time they start the semester, they actually have already made friends, and it starts way before, like once you're accepted and admitted to a certain program. Many of these universities have actually chat groups where this whole, like maybe your whole faculty is talking to each other, like all the new students are talking to each other. So you really have an option to connect. But again, it's up to you, right? It's up to the student to make the first step and connect with these students overseas. For example, I have one student right now who will go to Paris, and as soon as she knew that she was accepted to that program in France, she was reaching out to the school and said, hey, are there any other US students there? And then talking to the admissions officer, she found out that there's actually a US student from California. So she connected with a California student, found out a lot, which is already in the second year, which already helped her to understand a lot more what will happen when she is there. And they connected so well with each other that they actually are planning to room together and rent an apartment together. So do you see the difference, right? That is a very active, proactive student who takes, matter into her own hands and makes it happen. So that is the kind of student that you want to go overseas, because they won't be intimidated if they don't see all the services and everything lined up in front of them, right? They know that they have to go out there and ask for it if they want something. So that is so the independence is a very big thing. But what you said also earlier, a big difference for students. So that's why it's important that if a family is thinking about international universities, they should start their conversation early on, so everyone understands what the differences are. So it starts already with the admissions process, which is very different. The US has a very complex application process, whereas many European countries, and specifically the public universities, have a very merit-driven application process. You don't need any extracurriculars. Often you don't need any essays or so, but you do need to meet very specific academic requirements, right? So that is one piece they need to be aware of, the family and the students, to get to meet all the academic requirements, right?
So what you're saying potentially is plan early, because you might pick different courses as a junior and senior in high school because you need a certain amount of math or science or foreign language or whatever it might be to meet the requirements.
Exactly. That is exactly it. So you should. If you plan that you want to go abroad, then the earlier you know, the better. So if you start ninth grade, you can actually plan your ninth grade course schedule in a way that you will end up with the math, for example, that you require to apply to certain degrees overseas. For example, if you want to study architecture or lots of other STEM subjects, obviously, they require really high math. They really want to see that you have calculus in your math class, that you ended up with that. And not only calculus as a regular class, but they need AP courses and AP exams to prove that. What universities overseas also like is the IB diploma. So the complete IB diploma, not only IB courses. And some universities will also consider the SAT. So for example, UK universities, they're very flexible in what they accept. And aside from the AP courses or IB diploma, they also consider SAT and even honors classes these days to qualify for their requirements. But since we're talking about UK, for example, UK has actually a written assignment, so to say. They have a personal statement that a student needs to write, but it's very different from the Common App essay, for example. So that is one country, the UK is one country where the application process has more elements. But many of the public universities are very straightforward, right? Meet all the requirements in these specific subjects. And if the course is not restricted and is open to everyone, then you're in, basically.
Okay. And then what about language requirements? If you're going somewhere with the intention of studying in English, and English is your first language, that should be pretty simple. But if you did want to study in German or French or whatever other, can you learn enough of that language and then pass some sort of test in order to prove you can speak the language, or they don't care, they'll let you do whatever you want, or how does that generally work?
So there's obviously two options, right? You can either study in the language that everyone else of that country studies it, and in the national language, basically. Or you can specifically apply to a English taught major. If you apply for an English taught major, then oftentimes it is not required that the student speaks the national language of the country. But that depends. It depends on the country. It often depends on the university. So some universities may require that they have a very basic level of the language of that country, just because that will obviously help the integration of the country, of the student into the country also, right? Because it's not only life on university, but they have to live also outside, which is another point, for example, and you touched on that earlier. Many universities in Europe, for example, are not campus universities, and they don't have the residential element in there. They are city campuses. So they have different faculties are in different places of the city. You have to move around and you have to find your own housing. They might have student dorms, but they're not really, they're also spread out all over the city. So it's
Right.
The living aspect is also very different. But coming back to the language part, so some universities may require a very basic knowledge of the language, but others, most of the universities actually, if you apply for an English taught major, they don't require you to have any knowledge yet of the language of their country.
Right.
So some countries, for example, the Netherlands just started that they, while you don't have to speak Dutch at the start of your degree, they want you to take language courses during your degree and learn some Dutch. And I think that's not a bad idea, because honestly, you are living in that foreign country, you are going to university there, you interact with the regular people there, it will make your life just so much easier, right? And it is also a nice thing to do, I think, to really show the residents of that particular country, to show that I'm eager to learn about their culture, learn about their language, right? So for that reason, I think students should definitely be open to learn that different language.
Right.
Once they're
I mean, it also seems like there's a bit of an English bias. In other words, in many small countries where, my wife is Hungarian, most Hungarians used to, learn Russian when they were occupied, or German or French or English. They would kind of mix it up. Now, I think just about every student starting at grade school learns English.
That's true.
And I think a lot of other smaller languages all kind of point to English. Therefore, English is becoming kind of the default language, the default second language in a lot of places. Therefore, it seems like there's a lot more English available in a lot of places where you might not expect it.
Oh, that's true. That makes integration much easier, right?
Right.
For students to go abroad. But having said that, though, Brad, it's that in the big cities, yes, you will find that, right? You find, because the big cities are also very international. So yes, people will speak a lot of English and it's very easy to get around, right? But once you go a little bit more outside of these big cities, it might be a different picture, right? So for that reason, I think people of that country really cherish that if they see in a student or in any person, basically also, visitors, travelers, if they really try and say, hey, I am interested, even if it's just a few words, but it will just make the connection so much easier between, people of different countries, right?
Right, exactly. Okay, well, that was a lot of great information. I appreciate you sharing. I know you've got a special coming out. Can you tell us a little bit about your Study in Germany YouTube series, what that's about, and where we can find it?
Thank you so much for mentioning this. I appreciate that. Yeah. So, I thought I will shed a little light on studying in Germany, since there is a lot of interest, but then nobody really knows how to start. And it is actually not difficult, but it has some different aspects in terms of timeline. And the timeline issue applies to many universities overseas. But while the US, for example, starts fall of the senior year, right? That students apply to college. Some universities overseas, they actually start their whole application process a little bit later. And one of the countries that starts really late is Germany. So they are starting with the application process for a fall entry in around April, May, June of that same year. And the application deadline is actually tomorrow. So tomorrow is the application deadline for students who are interested in studying in Germany. And for Germany, it's very important that you meet the academic requirements, talking about public universities now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is often of interest to many families because tuition is free. So as a general, so overall, we can say that as a statement that yes, university in Germany doesn't have any tuition fees, even for international students, but there are a few exceptions. And one is one state in Germany, Baden-Württemberg. They are charging a really small fee for international students. So they pay 3,000 euros a year. And if you think about, okay, it's a 3-year degree, then you pay 9,000 euros for your degree. But that's tuition cost, right? Only obviously you have all these other costs there. And then some universities are now allowed to charge tuition, and some have taken advantage of that. So, for example, the TU in Munich is also charging tuition now to international students. And that is, I think, a little bit higher. I don't want to be quoted on this. So I think it is 3,000 a semester. So that is a little bit more expensive, right? But again, you're basically talking about 3-year. But so I just wanted to explain that whole process of how do you make it happen that you can end up and study in Germany. And that's what the podcast, or not the podcast, it's like little video shorts of maybe 1 to 2 minutes where you can get a little bit of insight what it means if you study in Germany. How is higher education different to the US education system?
Right.
So, and yeah, where can you find it? Well, you can find it on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, which is Global College Advisors. And there you find actually also all the interviews with all these international universities as well, where, any family that is interested to learn a little bit more about this, they are welcome to just listen to some of these webinars and can learn more about study in Germany as well. And I'm not sure if you have that. I think I sent you a link to Global Education Guide. So that is something you could offer to your listeners maybe too. It gives a great overview of international education overall with cost comparisons also. So as a first step into it.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So we'll put links to your guide and your YouTube channel and all that information in our show notes. But I appreciate you giving us all this great information. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brad. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns 2 companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.